Over the weekend, this game, Legacy Steel and Sorcery, made by Notorious Studios, a small 30-man dev team out of Irvine, California, comprised of former Blizzard devs and backed by investment money from the likes of Riot and OTK, went into a free alpha playtest weekend. So I ran around with Repose for a few hours when it opened, and then gave away about 40 game keys to people on Twitter. Before I get into this review, I want to make a few things clear. I'm not being paid for this review. They have not offered me, and I have not accepted anything from them. I have no intention of being paid by them in the future, and that being said, this game is not polished. It's an alpha playtest for feedback from players, like myself. This is not early access. A lot of the map is roughed in, what the industry refers to as gray box, and it's nowhere near feature complete. So I'm going to try to keep this review in the context of this game having been in alpha text gray box and free for the weekend, not an early access game title. The idea of their playtest weekend was to get a feel for what players liked and did not like, and well, there is an abundance of both. So let's talk about the good things first. The game is structured similar to that of an extraction shooter, but it's being done so as high fantasy, more similar to games like Dark and Darker, and most recently the Dark and Darker clone-esque Dungeonborn, with the genre being coined as a hack and slash extraction game, where Dark and Darker uses a first-person camera and immerses you inside of a darkly lit multi-level dungeon with a more visceral feel devoid of a lot of the MMO-style visuals and a slower dungeon crawl style of pace. Legacy Steel and Sorcery is a bit more whimsical, with an outdoor oil painting canvas style of art form, bright colors, a la League of Legends or World of Warcraft, and an over-the-shoulder or third-person camera, floating combat text for your impacts, and a lot more active use abilities for attack, defense, and mobility. You move faster in this game, and there's a little bit more button mashing. They have a rudimentary work-in-progress talent system to augment your abilities. The abilities themselves have different tiers where you can tailor a character to suit your playstyle or specialization, and the weapons and armor have passives built into them that modify your character's abilities. For example, the Priest has an attack that looks like a dashing palm strike if you left-click while sprinting. One of their headpieces says a follow-up charged attack done by holding left click will generate its follow-up attack faster as a result of that dash attack having hit a mob. I will take that. I will take that. I will take that. This other headpiece augments the priest's heal, which is done by pressing Q, adding an additional 50 points of healing to each heal. There are also single-use items, like the ranger class gets different elemental arrows that they can fire. The priest gets what appears to be tarot cards for casting things like shields or resurrection spells. Rogues get poison and sleep darts, etc., as part of the game's crafting system, made from items found around the map. That is to say, the crafting and currency system is early, but has solid bones, of which they are improved upon by leveling up traders based on how much stuff you buy from them. And this is a pretty common trope that we've seen in other extraction games, either being done in gold or these shard thingies that I use to buy a backpack. When you spend X amount of gold, they level up and give you a broader inventory and more crafting recipes. Multiple times as I was working my way through the menus or playing on the map, there were moments when I thought, oh, that's neat, even going so far as to say it aloud a few different times during the course of the matches that I was in. But that's kind of where the good stops. The bad was unfortunately in the performance. Again, I know this is an alpha build, so to any of the devs watching, please understand that I realize this. However, I'm still going to give you the critique here. First, there's a lot of lacking animation. The animations of the characters themselves feel very stuttery as I move through the map. More so, the character's placement on the XYZ axis of the game as I'm moving through space seems to hitch, pop, jitter, and blink kind of all over the place as I move through the world. This is even more pronounced when attempting to track other players through that space. And due to this, what I can only refer to as incredibly poor server performance, tracking enemies to time their attacks was horribly off and frustrating as you try to set yourself up to dodge an attack, if only to be hit by it anyway because the server was registering hits sometimes a half second in advance of the animation. Now, because it's in alpha, I gave this one a little bit of leeway because there's a lack of audio or visual cues for some of the larger attacks aside from someone waving a wand around above their head or turning red for a moment. But even once you started learning how things worked, the ability to get out of the way or time a block was just bad. It was really bad. I played the Ranger class, what the game calls a hunter, for a single round, and the arrows firing were visibly delayed by about 200 ms to where it was nigh impossible to shoot at or even time the shooting of any moving target unless they were moving in a direct line either toward or away from me. I found out later that part of this issue was the matchmaking server kind of spurging out and placing people on regions further away than their own, which sure was part of it, but even on a server where I felt my ping was fine, I still had this visible delay and these animation problems. I also noticed that the frame rate in certain areas, even with my NASA space PC with a 4090, 13900K, and DDR7200 RAM, was only seeing around 85 to 90 FPS in places, but that's to be expected given the game is still in gray box and it's far from optimized. Mantling onto ledges was not great. These maps have a bit of verticality, and there are obvious areas where the intention is to climb up the walls via the topography set by the level designers. Those animations, or how your character is supposed to climb up to another level, was incredibly difficult at times, with awkward clipping issues and these weird mechanics where you'd bounce off the wall you were trying to climb. The stamina system seemed to exhaust itself very quickly. There's an on-usability that priests can talent into that would allow you to dash upward if you hit sprint while floating. Priests have a floating ability. If you hold the spacebar, they can glide. This consumed about half my stamina gauge or more and would cause my priest, who was now 20 feet in the air, to then take fall damage upon landing on the ground, since she had no stamina to stop herself from falling anymore. Also, given the nature of over-the-shoulder cameras, it felt less immersive, kind of like I was playing Realm Royale from a few years ago. And while I can appreciate the nod to games like WoW for their design aesthetic, one I particularly enjoy, I've always felt that PvP games, especially slashing games like this one, tend to feel worse when the melee classes have less skill expression rather than their ranged counterparts. Chivalry is a great example of a game that has a middle ground between the simplicity of Dark and Darker and the extreme sweat of Mordhau. Legacy gets none of that because the melee classes cannot do any type of active parrying and riposting or directing their swings. It feels like a feature that would fit very well in this game, but was overlooked for a more arcade-like feel, and I personally think it suffers for it. So, verdict? I think the game has some really solid ideas, and I very much like the thoughts they're putting into character customization, but their netcode is currently horrendous and borders on the unplayable, especially if you're a skill shot style of player. If they really want this game to shine, they need to spend all of their time focusing on making the game extremely fluid and playable. Otherwise, all of the aesthetic design choices and movement tech and ability mixing will mean absolute bunk in the long run. I tend to compare titles like this to BattleBit, and while BattleBit doesn't have the most players in the world at the moment, their netcode and player tracking is spot on. And let's face it, the game is basically Roblox with guns. Visuals are not its focal point, but the game performs well, and that's really the main idea here. Performance over aesthetic. Now, I did end up reaching out to the game director and shared some of my ideas, and I'm trying to see if we can set up a dev question and answer session. Looks like that's going to happen. I don't know exactly when, but we're trying to get something slated for when the playtest is over so that we can have a conversation in the near future about some of the stuff that they have cooking and some of the ideas that I've shared here in this video. It's got good bones, but for me, this is at least a year out before it's going to end up seeing any early access stuff. That's just my opinion. If they want to do it right, anyway. And I do think that this genre needs competition. Dark and Darker shouldn't be the only playing. Competition breeds innovation after all, and I don't think Dark and Darker should be standing alone. Competition breeds innovation after all, and I don't think Dark and Darker should stand alone. So for those of you that enjoy this kind of content and you'd like to see more from me, please consider supporting the channel by hitting the subscribe button. That would be awesome. Otherwise, you can check me out live over at twitch.tv/onepeg, where I stream live around 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern every single day of the week. Otherwise, if none of that works for you, then perhaps I shall see you in the next video. Thank you so much for lending me your eyeballs, everyone. We'll see you real soon. Peace. Hey, if you enjoyed that video, YouTube thinks you're going to like this one too. Maybe check that one out.